This is Ebody X, and this is The Candid Frame. There are a lot of things that you have to learn in order to become a great photographer. But beyond shutter speed, aperture, depth of field, and the rule of thirds, the most important thing to develop is a sense of what people, places, things, or moments are worthy of a photograph. We often take our cues from what others have photographed, and we frequently mimic what those photographers did to create those images. And that's okay, because that's a big part of learning photography. But a remarkable thing happens when a photographer is led to photograph their own life experiences and circumstances. That began for Meryl Meisler when she began photographing her Jewish American family and community. That eventually segued into her documentation of New York's social scene during the late 70s, and eventually to her photographing the Bushwick community, where she worked as a teacher at a local public school. The result is a body of work that is not only highly personal, but that provides a unique glimpse into 3 different cultural communities over a span of years. And part of why she gave herself permission to photograph in that way was inspired by several photographers, not least of which was Diane Arbus.
Seeing Diane Arbus's work had a direct influence on me. When I went to the show, I was just going to MoMA, and I saw the show. I was moved. I saw them as very honest, beautiful portraits of human beings. And they struck me, and they also seemed familiar to me. Like, I didn't see it as being a freak of a giant and his little parents. I saw them, those reminded me of my great aunt and uncle, like my family's with them. I recognized the backgrounds. They struck me as very human people.
Her photographs at the club scene capture a mashup of race, ethnicity, class, and sexuality that would not have been possible even a decade before. It was a rare and exciting time, and Meryl was in the midst of it all with her camera.
You could be next to someone who's very well known, and I didn't feel like there was a security next to them at all. And also a lot of people of different ages, and people, you can see by photographs, there's a lot of people who you might call transgender people, though I would say cross-dresser or trans, I don't remember what word, but just everyone was everybody. And everybody was anybody. And you had all different kinds of people who loved dancing, music, the scene. And it was also very exciting because it was kind of growing around you. I mean, it was a music and dance form that kind of came from under your feet and was blossoming everywhere, and it felt like you were in the midst of it all.
We'll talk to Meryl about how and why she created her body of work while still having a full career as a teacher, and how in retirement she has become recognized for her lifelong work as a photographer. Welcome to The Candid Frame. So Meryl, welcome to The Candid Frame. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Well, I am so pleased to be seeing you again.
Yeah, I had such a good time chatting with you when we were in Miami. That was so much fun.
That was beyond fun. That was really great. Yeah. That was really great.
And seeing your work, I was just so in awe. It was just so impressive. And the story behind it, just made it all the richer.
Thank you.
So I want my listeners to find out a lot about you. So we're going to try to cram in as much as we can in the limited time that we have. Now, I want to get started because part of your story is that you came from a family in New York where you had a couple of photographers in the family.
Yes.
And that even though you may not have immediately picked up a camera when you were a young kid, that made an impression on you. Tell me about those people.
Yes, it's very true. Though we would never say that it was a family of photographers, but in retrospect, yes. my dad, Jacques Meisler, was a printer by trade. He had his own printing company, but he was a really good photographer. And he had a twin lens reflex. He had one of the first Polaroids. He did movies. And I have his negatives from when he was younger. You can see photographs he took of his brothers in a tree. And then when he was dating my mother, his wife and extended family. And of course, every special occasion. But they're really fantastic photographs. I mean, he even photographed our house when I had a house fire as still lives. He's a really good photographer. He has a great eye and all for art. And always told me that anyone who has a gift, for the arts is very fortunate. And he also brought home printing plates from home, and they were copper, and he polished them up and put hooks on it and hang them, and that was art. So he opened eyes to art. But my father's father's named Meryl Meisler, and he was a machinist by trade. And every time I ever saw my grandfather, he had a very serious camera, like a rangefinder, a Leica-looking kind of camera, and a light meter in your face. And he was photographing. And my father's brother, my Uncle Al, he always had a camera. I mean, and he used it. It was just an ordinary part of life. And like I told you and everybody else, is that my grandfather, maybe I saw one or two of his photographs. And so I understand someone like Vivian Meyer's story, that it's like really the act photography is enough unto itself, that you just do it because like you whistle, right, or you have dinner together. But it was obviously a passion. And I have photographs of a photograph of my grandfather holding a press camera. I heard that he built his own tintype camera, but nobody knows where his work is. So I think that made an impression that photography is something that's very natural part of life. I did receive my first camera at age 7. I don't have it. I actually still have it. I don't have it here. It's a 620 camera. I took film and sent it out, and it was called The Adventurer. And I photographed my little brothers, my pets, friends on the block, school, Girl Scouts, the same things I did later on.
Man, you got started earlier than me.
There you go.
That's great. You went to college, but not necessarily got a degree in photography, though you took some classes while you were in college. So it seems like you were interested in being creative, but you weren't really sort of clear in terms of what exactly you wanted to do. So tell me how and why photography started sort of creeping into your consciousness in a more substantive way.
Okay, my undergraduate degree, I went to school for something just not knowing, but I'm of the age that girls become teachers or secretaries. And freshman year, I went to Buffalo State College, and I was taking psychology classes, elementary ed. I took a beginning art class, and then it ended in beginning art class. Art for non-majors. The professor said, "Did you ever think about switching to art?" And I literally felt my heart pounding. And I called my parents up and I said, "I'd like to switch it to art." And they said, "As long as you got a teaching degree, so you could always make a living." I did not take any photography classes in undergraduate school, though a very famous teacher was at Buffalo State, Leslie Crims, but I wasn't even aware of it. I took drawing, painting, ceramics, everything else. And then in my senior year, I took myself to MoMA, and I saw the Diane Arbus retrospective, and I was deeply moved. For graduate school, because my degree was in art education, you have to get a master's within 5 years, no matter what. I wasn't sure what to do. I accepted a position to go to University of Wisconsin at Madison for many reasons. But I had met when I went to visit the school, I met a friend of a friend, Sandy Feldman, and she said, "Oh, the photography classes here are great. It's a great program. This guy, Cavalliere Ketchum, it's just wonderful." So I thought, when I decided to go, I was starting my master's in art education. I wanted to really study illustration. I got in as art ed. I decided to take a photography class because to learn how to use a real camera. So I bought a 35 millimeter camera, and I read the instructions on the plane and jammed the camera, which is like the story of my life, and took the introduction to photography class with Cavalliere and was introduced to the work of a WPA artist, the FSA artists, more of Arbus, Lartigue, Jacques Henri Lartigue. When I went home on my first vacation, but then I had a Monolta SRT 101. I started immediately taking self-portraits and photographs of my family and friends. I took those, came back from vacation, developed a film, made a contact sheet, and the professor said, "What is going on in these pictures? What is this?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I've never seen anything like this. What are you talking about? Look at these backgrounds. Look at the stuff in the room. Look at the furniture. Look at the wallpaper." It's like, where is this? I said, "This is where I come from. I come from Long Island, the suburbs of New York City." It's like, everyone's house looks like this. And he explained to me, he said, because he was from New Mexico and he was documenting Native Americans and people moved from Mexico. And he talked about how people's environment kind of represents a lot about their culture. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like anthropology or excavating a archaeological site, what they put up there, and it really talks about a time and a place. It's like a capsule. And I was pretty surprised. But printing the work, I decided I wanted to get more detail. So next time I went home, I bought a used Graflex Norita 2.25. And I continued doing these self-portraits, going into the family attic and taking out like my ballerina outfits and Girl Scout outfits and tap dance, my youth, and playing in the living room and taking photographs of my family at holiday dinners and get-togethers, visiting my friends I grew up with and photographing them. I would take clamp lights. I feel like another major influence was that I went to the theater a lot growing up in New York. My parents were not the kinds that just kept us out Long Island, besides the fact that my dad's business was in Manhattan and family in the Bronx, but we went to see Broadway shows, half-price tickets, and I think that had a really big influence because I kind of was setting the stage of these interiors. Yeah. I'd put up 2 clamp lights and I'd take photographs.
You are so ahead of your time because everything you're doing is what a lot of young women are doing now on Instagram, right? They're doing exactly what you described, especially like costumes, setting up self-portraits, considering the environment they're shooting in all the time. And you were doing it years ago. You just didn't have Instagram.
Thank you. And it's really, and it's funny, but I switched I worked my way in the art department. I switched into a double major. My major professor was my illustration drawing professor, Donald Anderson. He was like my best friend and mentor. And then my minor was photography. And I kept that through and had my master's show was my drawings and illustrations and my photographs. And a lot of the photographs that are in SASSY 70s are really work that I started taking back then. Yeah. The Girl Scout, it was like for my master's show, but then when I graduated, I wanted to continue this work. And I moved to the city, but I went out to Long Island and continued this series.
I want to go back to, you mentioned Diane Arbus. And I think it's really fascinating when I take a look at your work and I see a lot of links to her, not so much direct inspirations, but this idea that really strikes me, especially when I think back to that period in time, is that the kinds of people that Diane photographed and that you photographed weren't typically seen on gallery walls, right? Those are people that basically were just completely under the radar as far as the fine art world was concerned, right? People were often photographed outside or in a more outside of the country in different cultures and different environments. And I'm wondering if that experience of seeing Diane's work, and the way I describe the people that she photographs are extraordinary, ordinary people, right?
I like that.
I'm wondering whether seeing that work sort of made an impression on you in terms of who was worthy of being photographed? I know you may not have consciously been thinking about that, but when you think about your work and her work and some other people, do you think part of what was at play, maybe even unconsciously, was that?
Seeing Diane Arbus's work had a direct influence on me. When I went to the show, I was just going to MoMA, and I saw the show. Like I said, I was moved. I saw them as very honest, beautiful portraits of human beings. And they struck me. And they also seemed familiar to me. Like, I didn't see it as being a freak of a giant and his little parents. Mm-hmm. I saw them, those reminded me of my great aunt and uncle, like my family's with them. I recognized the backgrounds. It did not, they struck me as very human people. Mm-hmm. And it was a combination of Arbus and then being introduced to the work of Jacques-Henri Lartigue, because he photographed very playful photographs of his family at the turn of the 20th century, growing up in Paris, and they were really, really funny, hysterical, honest, candid pictures. So I think the combination of those two inspired me. But of course, the decision, when I was going to a medium format, I saw this camera, and it was this nice square, and it was light. And the gold, I remember Cavalliere Ketchum said, it's the golden rule. I also, switching back to it, because I just got it working again. This camera's been out of commission for 18 years. It's like, oh my God, I'm so glad I have to make a decision about going horizontal or vertical. I love the square. And of course, come on, the direct flash. And between Ouija and Arbus, and I also had the opportunity to study with Lisette Model, when I came to New York, and that was a very decisive decision that I wanted to study with Lisette Model. And I used my portfolio of Long Island. I kind of called them to my friends, and I said Long Island, Jewish princesses. And I used that portfolio to get into Lisette Model's class at the New School. But it was definitely a direct decision of doing very honest, playful photographs of people who were important to me. Mm-hmm. And they were also very referencing, my father, doing sophisticated snapshots. How's that?
Yeah, I like that.
I put on these ballet outfits and tap outfits and all these things that are still in the attic, because Dad also took pictures of me like that, or dressing up for the prom, and of course my brothers as well, but they didn't tap dance and ballet, but Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and special occasions, those things that you wore, mm-hmm. and how you posed yourself. So that was definite influence, you could say, yeah. and I've always claimed it, and she should know it.
Your body of work includes the days in which you were partying with your girlfriends and going out to the discos and clubs during the 70s. And those images are absolutely amazing. And they give such a unique and personal and intimate perspective of that time. Because I think when a lot of people think about that time, they think about sort of the Hollywood version of it. They think about cocaine, disco balls, open sexuality, and stuff like that. But it was about so much more. But you weren't going there as a documentary photographer. You were there having a good time, and you just happened to have a camera. Why did you bring a camera with you and just go out and party like everyone else your age was doing?
Well, let's go back. Why was it every time I saw my grandfather, he had a camera with it? I was like, here I was, I'd set up a dark room. I had a camera. I loved doing it. I realized this is a way that I'd like to relate to the world. Mm-hmm. And moving to New York City was extremely exciting. And I was pursuing my interest in photography, though I was never pursuing it commercially. I always never thought my work was commercially viable.
Yeah.
And I was working as a freelance illustrator. But photography was my passion. And like I said, I set up a darkroom. I bought film. I was developing it. Darkroom was in my cousin's laundry room, and printing. And also a very good stroke of luck in that time. So from I moved to New York City in August of 1975. In 1977 and 78, 78 and 79, I was a CETA photographer, CETA, Comprehensive Employment Training Act. It was like the WPA of the 70s. And I applied for and was accepted to be a documentary photographer, CETA photographer for the American Jewish Congress, documenting Jewish New York using my Long Island, Suburbia, Jewish family pictures and friends. It was part of my portfolio to get in. And the best thing about that was I had a regular, steady income. I made $10,000 a year. I felt I was rich. And so I was doing my documentary of Jewish New York during the day and going out dancing all night. So I think that things like grants and fellowships and opportunity shows, accolades, no, it boosts your self-esteem and confidence in what you're doing. But I started doing that earlier, but I'm saying that really helped. Mm-hmm. And so my CETA grant didn't just make this archive of Jewish New York during the day and start me in a teaching career. It actually helped me have the confidence and the will and the desire to photograph everything I saw and save it.
So tell me about the scene, because you know it firsthand. I was a young buck back there, when I would visit New York, seeing my cousins going out to the clubs. And when I would see them leaving at midnight, and I'm in LA.
Midnight? Come on, 4 a.m.
No, they're leaving the apartment where we're staying with them at midnight. And in LA, I'm like, that doesn't happen. Usually leave a lot earlier. I'm going, you're leaving now? I said, yeah, this is early, because they intend to be out all night. To me, that was unfathomable, but I was too young to go out there and find out what trouble they were getting into. But I really am curious. I mean, I want to talk about your photographs, but what was that experience like at that time for you? What was so thrilling about it?
Well, I think you could see us having a ball. Mm-hmm. It started, my cousins and I moved into her house. She was Elaine Rosner, and her sister Jerry and sister Barbara. They just had so many different kinds of friends, literary circles, feminist circles, the Puerto Rican arts community. I mean, I just was going to so many different kinds of clubs at night and meeting different kinds of people, and that was great. And then in February of 1977, I took another class at the New School with someone named Bob Edelman, and it was about making your own book, and it was supposed to be a book about my Long Island series. But he did invite me to go to something on February 14th at the Copacabana called the Coyote Hookers Masquerade Ball. and COYOTE, and that stood for cast off your old tired ethics. I dressed as my Girl Scout outfit. I didn't know what to expect. And I went there, and it was really like it was the leader of Coyote was someone named Margot St. James. And in my mind, I would say it was like a organization like trying to unionize prostitution, like rights and health rights and really self-esteem, and it was union work. And they were having a ball on Valentine's Day, and it was a wild party. And they were obviously working men and women. I mean, I would say sex workers in amazing outfits, showing off their best. And there were definitely clientele there, as well as a lot of paparazzi, as a lot of onlookers, whoever was invited there. There were some people in the movie industry. And there I was with my camera, and what a bunch of photographs those were. And it was the first time I really heard it was at the Copacabana, a really great system with souped up disco going full blast. I've been to clubs in Wisconsin and things like that, but it didn't compare to the sound system and the costumes and the party atmosphere that I experienced on February 14th, 1977. And around a week, shortly after there, I went to Mardi Gras because I'd gone to a workshop. I was showing my portfolio around and going to workshops, trying to study photography. And I went to ICP, International Center for Photography. And somehow I showed my portfolio. I showed my portfolio. And honestly, people went crazy. Cornell Capra invited me to show his work. Michael Smith, who was a photographer from New Orleans, who was having a solo show there, loved my work, wanted to trade with me. A White House photographer was there, loved my work, wanted to trade with me. The Michael Smith, who was one of the great documentarians of New Orleans, and he invited me to come down to Mardi Gras. So I took a bus I think it was called the Gray Rabbit bus. It was maybe like $59 round trip, or maybe it was Green Tortoise. I went on a bus. I think I had like $50 for the week. And I went to his house in Mardi Gras. What was amazing there was, I'm going to say the wrong name. I'm sorry, I have to look it up because I wasn't thinking about this story, but a really, really famous filmmaker was at his home who did work about food. I'll look it up later. I'm sorry. Forgive me, but he's so well known. It was like he was there. This woman, Via Winroth, was there in the house, all guests of Michael, and she was the founding director of education at International Center for Photography. Via and I went out, and Michael Smith showed us like the real Mardi Gras, the parties leading up to it. And taking us to the Tapatula Indians. I mean, we really, the real authentic whole week of Mardi Gras. And Via and I went around with our cameras. She had a little Diana point-and-shoot camera, and I brought my Norita. And those photographs have not been seen. That's down working your nose now. Those are insanely wonderful. So that now continue to party. But on the bus coming back, there was somebody on the bus named Judy, and she was a wild woman. And she was, I asked if she'd like to pose for me sometime. It was actually for men's magazines, because I was doing some illustrations for them under a pseudonym. And she met somebody else on the bus who was a bartender at CBGB's, and she had a crush on him. So when we came back, we were going to CBGB's and visiting the bartender, and that was really great fun. And it was, and I have these photographs of CBGB's, and then Studio 54 opened, and of course everybody heard about it and wanted to go there. I give Judy the credit. I think she called up for the first time, she called up the PR people for Studio 54, and this is the very beginning, and got our name on the list that we were covering it. So we went, once is that, like that, when you went there, you got all put on outfits and get your way in. So the first time was on a guest list. After that, the doorman knew you and let you in because you're cute, And I brought my camera because that's what I love to do.
Yeah.
And I photographed, but it wasn't just Studio 54, it was all the clubs. Yeah. They were popping up everywhere. And so, going out, maybe 11, but definitely 4 o'clock, and after hours clubs. It was a blast. I didn't carry it everywhere. I'm like, I was at the Palladium. I was at the Mud Club. How come I don't have those pictures? I guess sometimes I just went out and was having fun and not carrying the camera. Silly me. But many times I did, and I'm glad I did, because I didn't just photograph famous people. I photographed people I thought were very interesting.
And that's one of the things that fascinates me about your work. Visually, they're phenomenal. And then, in terms of historic context, some of the people that you photographed and all that is just amazing. But when I thought about your work, what really sort of struck me was you were photographing at a time and in a place where people that normally would never be together under virtually any circumstances were suddenly together. There was black, white, Latino, gay, straight, rich, poor. I mean, it was just a whole hodgepodge. And to think that, even 10 years before, the idea that these people would be socializing together, acting out, having fun, would have been unheard of thinking back to the 60s, much less the 50s. So when I take a look at your photographs, that's what strikes me. Today, that's normal. But back then, virtually anywhere in this country, except for maybe certain big cities, but New York was sort of a precursor to a sort of democratization of just having fun, where those social barriers that normally would have segregated all of those people, those walls came down. And that's what's really fascinating about your photographs, is that you provide a really first-person account that is not distant or objective, right? You get a real sense that...
right there.
Yeah, and it seems like you, just like you had affection and respect for your own family members that you were photographing, that comes off in the photographs of all the people that you photographed in the clubs.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much, because I think that is a core of something who I am. I do have a high respect for lots of different kinds of people, or just people being themselves. I think it's part of my nature, but it's also part of the attraction for me as someone who grew up in very segregated Long Island. Just moving to New York City. I mean, I grew up in a town, Massapequa. It was nicknamed Matza Pizza. It was like Italian, Jewish, Irish, basic first and second generation white Americans. There was a town next to us, Amityville. That was an African American town, and they were separate. And so I found it so refreshing to just move to New York City in general, meet my cousin's friends who were all different colors and backgrounds and interests and from economic levels on an equal plane, and then going out to clubs, and of course, and I had come out as gay, as a queer woman, lesbian, whatever you want to call it. I was gay, and I was going places where it was okay, beyond okay. I actually liked mixed clubs, and my friend Judith was straight. So that's not who I like to go to places that was just a mix. I like the mix. I mean, to me, that's the magic of a place like New York City, and still is, the diversity of it. Now, of course, it was a different kind of segregation going on. Bridge and tunnel crowd. Explain that. Like just Studio 54, even though the owners were from Brooklyn, if you were perceived as being from the Bridge and Tunnels, you may not have been in there. And there were other clubs that would have themes of Brooklyn night or Queens night or so. But that's kind of funny in some ways, especially since now the outer boroughs are the hip clubs. But I did find that wonderful, because it wasn't just you'd go in and it would be hairdressers, someone like me, a freelance illustrator, someone just getting by on their bartending job. Not all, it ended when I became a teacher. I could not there weren't too many people had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and then be in charge of a room full of kids by 8 o'clock in the morning and really being conscious. That slowed down the nightlife. So it was people with flexible hours, I'd say, unless on weekends. It was wealthy, poor. They were from other boroughs and other areas. They dancing, hobnobbing. You didn't get a sense that you could be next to someone who's very well known, and I didn't feel like there was a security next to them at all. And also a lot of people of different ages, and people you can see by photographs. There's a lot of people who you might call transgender people, though I would say cross-dresser or trans, I don't know what word, but just everyone was everybody. And everybody was anybody. All different kinds of people who loved dancing, music, the scene. And it was also very exciting, because it was kind of growing around you. I mean, it was a music and dance form that kind of came from under your feet and was blossoming everywhere, and it felt like you were in the midst of it all. And and then another club would pop up, and you'd go check that one out. So, and the different themed parties, and of course, there's no internet, so it was word of mouth or like a printed invitation. It was a different way of knowing. And New York City was a time that it was known, the famous thing is New York drop dead. It was financially in the going through very difficult times, and yet these clubs were able to open in these gigantic spaces because it's probably very relatively inexpensive. I mean, prohibitive now.
Yeah,
and it was an open door to anyone with a lot of enthusiasm and interest to just go out and explore and meet different kinds of people.
Yeah. Before we get back to the show, I just wanted to let you know that this Wednesday, March 13th, 2019, I'll be a guest on Scott Kilby's The Grid to promote my new book, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow. The show broadcasts live beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll find it on Kilby One's YouTube channel, and it would be great if you would tune in that day and give me your support. You'll find a link in the show notes. And on Saturday, March 16th, I will be taking part in a panel about book publishing at the Los Angeles Center of Photography's open house. I, along with some other photographers, will discuss how we each have navigated the world of publishing. So if you are in Los Angeles and have always wondered how to get your work published, you should join us. You can find out more by visiting lacphoto.org or look in our show notes for more information. And remember, we still need your support in our effort to reach 100 new Patreon supporters. We are so close to reaching our goal. So become a Patreon supporter and commit to a reoccurring donation of $5 or more a month. Sign up today by visiting patreon.com/The Candid Frame or click on the link in the show notes or the Candid Frame website. Thanks, and back to the show. Well, you mentioned that you had to stop clubbing when you started teaching, and you started teaching in Bushwick, and that led to a whole new body of work. Tell me about that.
Okay, I had that CETA job, Comprehensive Employment Training Act, and when I got that grant, my dad said, when are you going to get a real job? As part of my CETA training, it was also to train you to be to work in the world, and I did my CETA volunteer work as a teacher because I had this teaching license and I was scared to teach. And I did volunteer teaching of homebound handicapped and kids at a Educational Alliance. And when CETA ended, I had a steady paycheck. Illustrating, I was always waiting for the check. The check was always in the mail. Mm-hmm. It wasn't in the mail as quickly as the bills were arriving, and I decided to use my teaching experience and my degrees and apply for a job. And I got in September of 1979. So this Employment Training Act worked. The United States got a teacher out of me because of this Employment Training Act. It actually worked. And I started for the first September 79 through June of 1980. I worked 4 days a week through a program called Learning to Read the Arts. The first year I was in the Upper West Side. The second year I was in the Lower East Side, which was very different than the Lower East Side is today. And then the third year, there were different programs. So it was 4 days a week meaning I had no health care or sick days. I had my name on a list to get a permanent job, a waiting list to be appointed for a permanent job. The third year, I was put in a school placement in East New York. And then in December of that year, I received a letter in the mail and letting me know that your file number 489361, there's a job for you or you can go for an interview for a middle school teaching job at Intermediate School 291, and gave me the address, and it was for an appointed position, meaning you're like a serf, and I mean it meant a position with a 5-day-a-week job with health care and a chance to get tenure and a chance for sick days and things like that. It was benefits. And essentially it said, I always thought it said you go over an interview, and if you didn't take the job, you'd be in the back of the list, bottom of the list for a job again. But when I recently, in the last few years, found the piece of paper that said you could either accept your job or you are off the list. You will never get a chance to get appointed again for a full-time job. So in December of 1980, I take the subway and I get out in Bushwick, Brooklyn, to go for my interview to Roland Hayes Intermediate School 291. I'd never been in Bushwick before, but I'd heard of it because in July of 1977 there was a big blackout in New York City, and on the night of the blackout, myself and my friend Judy, my disco friend, we were supposed to go down to Studio 54 because one of the owners, Ian Schrager, had invited her to come to a private party at Studio 54, I mean like one of the private rooms. And we'd never been to one of you heard about the private rooms, never been to one of those rooms. And of course, if Judith was invited, Meryl was going along too. And so we got all dressed up to go out that night, and it's dark. Go to the subway. Subway's not running. There's no lights on the Upper West Side where I was living. It's like, okay. So we got on our bicycles and pedaled down to Studio 54, and there were no lights on Columbus Circle. You didn't know what's going on. There's like no lights anywhere. Just only lights were the headlights of cars. Go to Studio 54, just leave the bikes there, pounding on the door, no answer. Boom, 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 no answer. It's like, okay. Took the bike, went back home. The next day, she says that she was calling the telephone, trying to call Studio 54, but not getting through. The next day, the whole world, or my world, heard about a place called Bushwick where there was rioting and looting, and you saw pictures in the newspaper of that place that was like destitute and going through really hard times. And it's like it was never on my radar that's where I did. There would be someplace I would seek out. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did go to see the discotheque where they filmed Staying Alive, John Travolta. Yeah. I did go to some out there. I didn't take photographs there. Silly me. I didn't know it was history. I didn't know I was recording history. I was just recording life. And when I got out in Bushwick, I was shocked. I mean, I got out and it looked like a bomb hit it the week before. It looked like Hiroshima. I mean, it was just rubbles of buildings and closed up buildings. It was right down the line. And I had been during my CETA grant, I went up to the South Bronx to see where I was born, where my family lived. Lower East Side was a dicey area. I mean, I went up to Harlem. I went around, many different neighborhoods. I'd never seen anything like Bushwick at that time, what it looked like. And I was like, here I am, like with my little suit and my portfolio, and I go down the block after block of a closed, very few inhabited buildings. And there's this school that kind of looks actually like a little like a prison, and I go in, and it's a middle school, so it's kind of chaotic to begin with, because that's kind of part of the nature of middle school and being a middle school child, intermediate schools. You were probably bad then too. And I go to the principal's office, and he's like wearing a three-piece suit, a gentleman man, a real gentleman, very nice. And he's telling me that he too was an art teacher. Backtrack. When I get out of the subway and I see what I see, I'm thinking it looks like Beirut of the time. I had a cousin, there was a war going on Beirut. I had a cousin who was editing for television and describing what Beirut looked like. And when I've seen pictures of it, I said, looks like Beirut. I also wondered, as I got out of the subway, saying, why is there a job available the week before Christmas? Maybe they killed the other art teacher. That went through my head. There's a possibility. Why would there be a job available? And I went in there and showed some of my work that I did with students through this Learning to Read Through the Arts program, showing my portfolio of teaching. And I remember he was sitting there drawing out his own desk blotter calendar because he was an artist. And I'm like, it seemed very surreal because it really was kind of chaotic. No, it was chaotic. And I said yes, because I wanted a job. And then that letter said, if I didn't take that job, I wasn't going to get this job with benefits. And it was something else, let me tell you that. I didn't carry a camera until February, because the June before, on the last day of school, I taught photography in these other programs. I love photographing, but classroom management is really hard for a young teacher, or for me. And also the photographs the photographs that were interesting of kids was not the behavior I wanted to elicit from them. So I didn't photograph a lot. I was letting the kids be the photographers, but on the last day of school, I had brought my camera to take pictures, and we were having a party, and an intruder came into the classroom, a man with a suit, looking at me, got my eye contact, and he said, "Give me your camera. I have a gun." I gave him my camera. I didn't ask to see my gun. That was it. I gave him my camera. I was like, and so the camera I have now is really a duplicate, because the other one was robbed. It was the same kind of camera, but that one was stolen or taken from me, or I gave it up. Who knows? He probably didn't have a gun, but I wasn't questioning it. So that was on my mind, and that certainly wasn't at all as perceived as scary as Bushwick seemed. I mean, think about it. I was teaching in East New York. That seemed fine to me. Going to Bushwick looked a lot different than anything I'd ever seen. So I didn't carry a camera because it didn't seem like it was a wise thing to do. Then going back and forth, getting on the subway, walking to school, coming back and forth, I couldn't resist because I was seeing more. It wasn't just buildings and garbage around. There were people, and I noticed kids would be, playing basketball. They would do a makeshift basketball hoop. They would playing jump rope. You started recognizing people. So I got a point and shoot camera. At the February, I started in December. By February, I bought one of the early point and shoots, loaded it with color film, because being a full-time teacher, I certainly didn't have time to be in the darkroom anymore. And I was going out on weekends, but that was going out, that was becoming less and less, because you have lesson plans and you have to get up. It's a different point in my life. I was exhausted. And I used color slide film, put it in my camera, and when I get out of the subway, just photograph what I saw going to school and what I saw coming back. And if a lot of the rooms in the school building, I didn't have windows, because that's the style. I thought it was all be air conditioned. If I saw something out the window that was interesting, I photograph out the window. If there was a fire drill, I carried it in a fire drill. And I had the film developed and just put it in boxes and write down what it was.
Yeah.
And I did this for 14 years. I taught in that neighborhood for 14 years. I started a photography program for our teacher. They were starting an attendance improvement dropout prevention program when the teachers noticed that I'm always taking photographs and asked if I wanted to start a photography program, and I did. So, but in retrospect, because there's a long story about how these photographs came out, and you spend hours, when I looked at my pictures, I realized that most of them are really joyful. I didn't photograph crack vials. I didn't photograph junkies. I didn't photograph people strung out. I photographed really people being what most people are, trying their best in every situation to live life to their fullest and wanting the best for themselves and their neighbors and their children. I was looking for upbeat things because then what? I didn't even photograph. People say, do you have photographs of all the graffiti? A lot of the graffiti were murals to kids who had been killed too young. I didn't photograph things like that either because I in retrospect, I was looking for upbeat things because I wasn't there for a day. I wasn't there for a week. I wasn't there on assignment. This was my job, and I needed the job. And I was looking for things that made me want to come back the next day. And so if there were photographs of landscapes of buildings that are collapsed, the light is beautiful. I thought, sometimes I literally thought Ansel Adams would have taken that picture. I was looking for more.
I appreciate that about your work because that's being a person of color, especially in an area that, that the way it's perceived outside of that community is very rigidly defined, especially negatively. There's an expectation that if you do make photographs, that's all it's going to be about. And for a large number of people, they're not into that crap. Like you said, they're just out there earning a living, trying to raise their families, trying to mind their business, trying to get through the day in any sort of variety of ways. But I've seen plenty of times when people from outside of those communities look at photographs that are like yours, that are, focusing on the positive. The question is, where's this stuff? Where's the stuff that I'm expecting to see that you're not showing me? So I think that your photographs are as true as anything else that covers the more negative aspects of it. Because I think there's a reality to any community, but specifically those communities, that is not so black and white. And I'm really appreciate that your photographs reveal a very honest reality that exists even in the midst of all of those challenges that those people did and continue to have to live with.
I appreciate that very much. I mean, when I photograph people that I saw every day, kids I knew, their families, I recognized people. They recognized me. I didn't live in Bushwick. I never lived in Bushwick. But when you work someplace, you're spending most of your time there.
And your photographs are likely one of the few, if only, visual legacies of those communities. Because when people think about photography in New York, they're thinking about Manhattan, right? Not so much the boroughs. That may have happened, but not to the degree that it happened on the main island.
Well, I think I need to give credit to I'd like to. That work of Bushwick came out to the open. I was still a teacher in 2000. I retired in the public school system for 31 years. I retired in 2010. In 2006, like the winter of 2006, I received an email, because we're up to email already, from somebody named Adam Schwartz. And he was he said, John Napoli, a colleague of mine, a teaching college, John Napolito gave me your name to contact. because I'm a history. I love history. He's a history person who's teaching English as a second language at a school called IS 111. My wife taught in that school. And it was a school, a couple blocks from my school, and she's always laughing, hearing the stories from John Napolillo, how rough the neighborhood was in 1970s and 80s, and how different it was. And he would tell them these wild stories. And this guy, Adam, was applying for a grant with the Brooklyn Historical Society, applying they were having a gallery where community people could apply to have a show there. And he came up with the idea of doing a show on the theme of Up From Flames. It changes in Bushwick from 1977 to 2007. And we started researching not just text, but trying to find photographs from the era. And when he said, he was looking for photographs from the late 70s and through the 80s, all he could find were pictures of the blackout. Things were in the news. They were really the same image, the same. He just couldn't even find them. He was researching, and just the blackout pictures, and looting, and those images. And John Napolillo, who I taught with for 12 years, he and his wife, Linda Napolillo, they kind of like taught me how to teach and how to have classroom management. And he said, contact Miss Meisler, because we were very formal. Contact Meisler. She was always taking pictures. So this guy, Adam, emails me. I said, oh, yeah, I have pictures. I have lots of boxes of slides. Mark Bushwick, they're like in drawers literally in my basement. And I'll get them out. I'll look for some. And here's the first time I really looked. And good thing on my boxes, I would have the date and just major things, what Bushwick, schools, major topics. Besides everything else I was photographing. And I started looking through those boxes. And even though they were taking with this, I think of a early Canon sure shot, with plastic lens. It was out of very small depth of field, a little pop-up flash. Some of the slides even had mold on them because they're against the wet wall. But I'm looking through the images, and I started seeing the beauty in them. Mm-hmm. Okay. I made a selection to show Adam so we could do a proposal. And we made a selection. I scanned them. This is a different time of life. They had access to scanners. I scanned it, and we made a proposal to do the show, and it was accepted. And then he was doing the research he was collaborating with other schools, and interviews of people who lived through this period. And I'm like scanning my photographs. I live across from the street from Fashion Institute of Technology, and they had scanners there. So I took a golf class so I could have access to the scanners. I wasn't even like printing my own work then, but I was using their scanners and printing. I used their printing services and put up the show. And it was never anything like this. There was never a show about Bushwick and the history of Bushwick. And the show was up. It was well received. But then I looked at the pictures, and I became obsessed with them because I knew there was so much more. And also, I'm a printer's daughter. My daddy was a printer. Mm-hmm. Even though they looked fine, the prints, they weren't my aesthetic. They weren't how I saw the world. It's not the color. You look through the lens and you see things the way you see them. So then I became obsessed that I'm going to continue scanning these, do high-res scan, and I'm going to learn how to print my own work so I can print it the way I knew the world looked to me. And I got a archival printer, and I'm like, and of course, like the same theme of breaking new equipment, I'd break that, and I'd take classes how to print, and I started to going through their work and printing it. And my friends, I've always been an artist who showed their work, and if it wasn't straight photography, painting on photography, had many different series. And people would say, what are you working on now? It's like, I'm going back into that Bushwick work. I saw, when I was photographing on the streets of Bushwick, I was conscious of my history of photography. I felt like Walker Evans. I knew Helen Levitt would have taken certain pictures of kids. I mean, I literally have pictures of twins and thinking, these are Arbus twins. Of course, I knew that. Like I said, the landscape, Ansel Adams would have taken that picture. Of course he would. And I kept looking through the box and looking through the boxes and seeing these, there were gems here. And I am just going to keep going through them. I don't care that the show's over. I was looking at my work objectively and kept looking and looking and looking and printing and printing and printing. And I cold turkey. I gave a presentation. I'm part of a group called Professional Women Photographers, and I gave a presentation to them, a slide presentation. And people say, God, this work so interesting. Maybe show it to the Museum of City, New York. It's like, well, okay, I'm going to. And I cold turkey kept on calling and calling until I got the curator, Sean Cochran of the Museum of City, New York. He did not know who I was. I certainly had no reputation whatsoever. And I said, I have these photographs of Bushwick from the 80s. And he actually made an appointment for me to show them. I showed them. And I said, it was talked a long time about them. And I said, and I've got so much more that I haven't gone through. He said, well, come back and show me more. So I'm doing this as I'm going through my last 3 years of teaching, working full time, and I'm continuing to go through this work and printing it and starting to understand it. And then I have received an invitation to have a show, to submit a show at a place called Soho Photo Gallery. And somebody who I used to do this underwater photographs, submerging New York City with my fish photographs. And this woman's name is Fish, and said, oh, I'd like you to do your underwater stuff. I said, no, that's not what I'm interested in anymore. It's like, what is it? I want to show this Bushwick work. It's important. Well, I don't know if they'll accept it. It's like, okay, well, I submitted it. They did accept it. And I had this show. So I retired in June of 2010, a year, and I'm still printing away. And I had the first show in December 2011 of these Bushwick work. And I wanted to reach out to Bushwick to get them to come, people from Bushwick to really come. And I treated that show like it was a museum show. I gave it that amount of seriousness and thought and the press release. I mean, I just removed myself from who I was and treated myself like a best friend or a client and put my all into that. And it changed my life. And this work started being revealed. A wonderful story about that is that because I wanted people from Bushwick to come, because the only people who came to the show at the Historical Society seemed like the people who collaborated on the show, as a few of the politicians there that we interviewed, but it wasn't the real Bushwick crowd. And so I reached out. I said, oh, look at that. There's something called the Bushwick Community Darkroom. It's email. I contacted them. Oh, there's a blog called Bushwick Daily. I contacted them. They sent a reporter. It's like a little blog. And a reporter came from the Bushwick Daily. And from other journals came. But Bushwick Daily, she was really in journalism school. This person came and interviewed people, was doing a story about the show and filming. And then she emailed me like, I'm in the middle of my finals for school. I may not get this ad in time. I said, please, you're talking to a teacher. Of course, your school comes first. When you can do it, you can do it. It's like, that's it. You have to do that. But she did publish a piece about the show, and with some video clips of it that she made. And so the show was in December. It got press. People came. People came from all over. So people heard about it. I made a little sensation. And then in late January or early February, I think after it's over, I get an email in my spam requests. This is, through my Earthling, at the time I had Earthling, it was a spam request. And this request, the title kind of said, I'm in one of your photographs and I'm floored. It's like, I opened up this email and I don't have it anymore because, so I'll tell you, continue the story. And this email was an introduction. Someone introduced herself saying, my name is Vanessa Martyr. I grew up on Palmetto Street in Bushwick. I'm a writer now. I'm a teaching artist, meaning like a writer in the schools, and was doing workshops at Bushwick High School, which was down the block from where I taught, and the kids were kind of complaining about what a dumpy neighborhood this is, and I'm not going to say the word, but it starts with a B, and she said, "Oh, you have no idea what this was like. I grew up here. I grew up here in the late 70s and 80s, and this is like so nice now. You have no idea what." And the teacher in charge, because she wasn't a licensed teacher, you have to have a licensed teacher. The teacher in charge said, "You should look up the work of Meryl Meisler," and which floored me that a teacher and someone I didn't know in this high school knew my name and of my work, and told Vanessa, you should check out her work. So there was a break. I guess she had a break between classes. Vanessa went to the computer and Googled my name. Comes up with this thing on Bushwick Daily with a little QuickTime movie playing, and she says, stopped in her tracks. She saw a picture of her family, and she's in the picture with her family. I remember when you talked about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she contacted me. But in the email, she says, and I'm working on my memoir, and I'm on the chapter where I've just finished a story about something that's been really hard about the man who molested me as a child. And he's the guy looking out the window, looking at the photographer, looking at you. And I went, I slammed I had a knee-jerk reaction. I just deleted the email. I was in such shock. Right. I deleted the email. And then I was like, what did I do? But I still had the spam request. I deleted the email and threw it away. I was in a state of shock. And then I Googled her name. I said, oh, make sure it's a real person. She's not in jail somewhere or America's Most Wanted, over 18. And I started saying, oh, she's a performer. She's a real writer. She's written a book. She's given performances. Like, oh, how interesting. She grew up in a same-sex household in Bushwick. What if I contacted her through the email? And we met on Mardi Gras, February, which is Mardi Gras is a theme in my life. Mardi Gras is very important when I met important people. And we met in Mardi Gras, February of 2012. Right, my show was in December of 2011. February, we met for the first time on February 2012. She came to my apartment. I showed pictures. And we were both, I think we both were practically crying. It's like my photographs kind of were her life story. Even if there's this one picture of her in it and her whole family, but everything. It's like mostly of the block she grew up with. And her stories, because I actually ordered one of her books, her stories, and I started reading little clips. These were the kids I taught. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I taught her brother. And right there at the spot, we just knew we needed to collaborate together. We just needed to. I said, yes. She said, she's going to write the story, her memoir, and my pictures will be in it. I said, absolutely. I said, but you know what? I want to show this work in Bushwick. There's this thing called Bushwick Open Studios, and I want to get my work in there. So I said, we would do it together. She said, yes. And it became it's like, okay. And I'm writing to other galleries, trying to show people my work. And then it was an announcement again through this Bushwick Daily blog, a new gallery opening up, and it's for underrepresented people. Bing, that's us. Bing, that's me. People into education. Bing, that's me. Community. Bing, that's me. So I emailed this person, and I said with Nissa Frank, starting something called the Living Gallery. I have this portfolio of Bushwick from the 80s. She said, I'd love to see it. And her gallery didn't even open yet. I said, well, I have a writer I'm working with. You'd like to come together? Okay. We met on April Fools. And in the space that was going to be the gallery, which really looked like a dump right then, and open up the portfolio of photographs. She's going through this, and she said, I'd like to give you a show. It's like, okay. And yeah, so we want to have a show with Vanessa's writing and my photographs. Like, okay. So, well, we'd like to have a show in Bushwick Open Studios, which was like 2 months later. She said, okay. And that was it. Yeah. And Vanessa and I, and with Vanessa's blessing, we knew we planned out this entire show, did everything. The press had, the press releases, the writing, the printing. My partner, Patricia, who also you met, taught in Bushwick before she became a broadcast designer. She did the graphics for it. We knocked ourselves out, and the opening night was a smash. German TV came that weekend. It was Bushwick Open Studios, and it was people pouring in and out. And I had a sign-in book. I said, "Oh God, look at this! Isn't this funny?" Somebody wrote down, signed in, and saying that they were the art critic of the New York Times, Holland Cotter. Someone signed that Holland Cotter was there. I said, "Isn't that funny?" Well, Nissa, the gallerist, this young woman who's opening this gallery, her mother's an artist. And she looks at me, she says, "Meryl, see that man over there? That is Holland Cotter." The art critic of the New York Times came to this show and wrote it up in this piece about Bushwick Open Studios. And that was a miracle. That was a miracle. So
your story.
Bushwick launched my art career. Relaunched. Get back.
I've got one more question for you, but before I even say that, I love you. Okay, I just adore you, and your story for me is so inspiring, and there's so many takeaways from it, especially here talking to you. But I think that the thing that's really sort of key for me, and it's been on the forefront of my mind, is that oftentimes when photographers pick up a camera, they think that the most interesting things to photograph are things outside of themselves. And you are the perfect example that you can photograph your own life, your own experiences, the people within, in your vicinity in any variety of different ways, and make a significant body of work that matters. And,
thank you very much.
And I think that not enough people think that their own life experience is worthy of attention with respect to a camera. And I think if anybody takes away anything from listening to this conversation, I would love for them to sort of reconsider the value of that, because you've demonstrated that given persistence, talent, and tenacity, that somebody can, if not necessarily have a career as a quote unquote photographer, can nevertheless produce a body of work that will and does make a difference. So I just want to say that to you about you and your work, and I'm so glad that I had the chance to meet you.
Well, I am very glad. And okay, one more thing. Mm-hmm. That same opening, even more important, a stranger came up, this French guy, just said, "I just love your work." He came to the show because he was buying a building in Bushwick, and he was looking up the area, and he found the website that we did for the Brooklyn Historical Society. And he said, "I just think your work is great. I love it. I just wanted to meet you and say hello." So that's it. A year later, we had another show at Bushwick Open Studios, take a break. I walk into this bar, club, and the same man says, "Hello, this is my place." This guy, Jean-Stéphane Sauveur, who's a man from France who moved to Bushwick, who I found out it was a filmmaker, and he's a director, opened a club, a drag burlesque club in Bushwick. And he invited me to show in the basement of a drag burlesque club in Bushwick. And at first I was going to say no. I mean, I've had to work in museums, And Vanessa said, don't be such a snob. So that's where I had this show, and I got the idea to exhibit my disco work because of it. He ended up publishing my work. So I think if anything I'd like to report to anyone else is you don't know who is important in your life. The stranger, welcome. Mm-hmm. I'm a Jew. One of the tenets of Judaism is welcome the stranger.
That's awesome.
I think that presents welcome the stranger that you pass on the street. Welcome the strangers that come into your life. Everybody you meet is important.
Mm-hmm. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend one other photographer for our listeners to discover and explore. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
I would like to suggest my longtime friend, Tequila Minsky. She is a working street photographer, journalist who's so under-recognized. And she's the real deal. She too is a big, she actually was there during Haiti's earthquake and revealed that work to the world. I mean, she's an amazing photographer and a person who more people should know about. So without a doubt, I'm going to suggest Tequila Minsky.
Right. Well, thank you for this suggestion, and thank you so much for your time. I had so much fun talking with you.
Pleasure.
Thanks to Meryl for sharing her time and her story. You can find out more about her and her work by visiting her website at merylmeisler.com. And I'll be in Washington, D.C. in May for the Focus on the Story Photographic Conference. The International Photo Festival will feature some of the world's best photojournalists and documentary photographers, as well as talks, photo walks, and workshops, of which I am teaching one. If you want to sign up for my workshop or just want to find out more about the event, visit focusonthestory.org. And remember to check out my YouTube channel, where I discuss different aspects of photography by pulling images from listeners like you who contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr pool. You can check out the TCF Flickr pool and our YouTube channel by clicking on the link in the show notes and the website. My new book, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow, is now available. In it, I translate how to see and use light and shadow, line and shape, color and gesture to make great photographs. It's more than just how to make a good picture, but how you can develop a personal and intimate way of seeing and documenting the world around you. You can order the book today. And when you place your order from the Rocky Nook website, use the promo code Porello40 to receive 40% off the list price. Check out the website and the show notes for the link. And if you want to keep up with all things Candid Frame, sign up for our mailing list and you'll receive 3 free copies of my previously published ebooks. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, please take the time to write a review in the iTunes stores. It helps our ranking and creates greater awareness of the show. You can also support the show by making a monthly contribution through Patreon, or you can make a one-time contribution via PayPal. You'll find the links for both in the show notes and the website. Thanks to Allison Cobb, David Taylor, Sanjay Vijayanathan, and Robert Coffey for their recent contributions. I so appreciate it. And if you want to easily access every episode of The Candid Frame, download the Candid Frame app. It's available for both Apple iOS and Android, and it's free. Download it today, and you'll find it where everything else is in the show notes or the website at thecandidframe.com. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at simply @IbadianX. And this is IbadianX, and this is The Candid Frame.